Tomorrow morning, your alarm goes off. You get dressed, go somewhere at a specific time, and spend part of your day doing work another person or organization has decided needs to be done. Someone expects you to be there. Someone expects a task to be finished. And at the end, you receive something in return that helps you live. That arrangement feels completely normal. Now rewind deep into prehistory. A hunter is still working. A family is still gathering food, making tools, raising children, repairing shelter, and helping one another. But there is no employer waiting for them. No one is assigning a shift. No one is recording their hours. So when did that change? When did work become something another person or institution could organize? Farming seems like the obvious answer. But organized labor is older than farming itself. So the real story starts somewhere else. More than 10,000 years ago, people at places such as Göbekli Tepe were already coordinating large construction projects. That kind of work required cooperation beyond a single household. Researchers have proposed that communal feasting may even have helped mobilize people for some of it. Picture the basic problem. Stone has to be moved. Food has to be prepared. People have to show up and work together. But none of that requires an employer. Humans can cooperate because of ritual, reciprocity, obligation, status, or a shared goal. No wage is required. That gives us the first surprise. Humans learned to organize large groups before they learned to hire them. Agriculture still changed the scale. As some communities became more settled, food and other resources could be produced, stored, counted, and concentrated more easily. That made larger systems of organization possible. It also allowed some people to spend more time on specialized tasks. But one distinction is enough to keep the mystery open. A farmer working for a household is still not an employee. So what happens when labor moves beyond the household? That is the point where the story changes. When work connects many households to larger stores of resources, someone has to keep track of what is coming in, what is going out, and who is connected to the system. By the late 4th millennium BCE, southern Mesopotamia gives us a much clearer answer. Uruk grew into one of the earliest great cities. And instead of starting with a palace or a king, start with something much smaller, a clay tablet. At first, it does not look important, but the marks on tablets like these record goods and quantities. Then another clue appears: workers. Then rations distributed to those workers. Then occupations and categories. Piece by piece, the picture changes. Labor is no longer only happening. It is being recorded. A person can be placed in a category. A ration can be assigned. A quantity can be counted. An institution can keep a memory of work after the people involved are gone. For the first time in this story, labor has become visible to administration. And the tablet gives us something archaeology usually cannot. It may not preserve what a worker thought about the job, but it can preserve the system around that worker. A category, a quantity, a distribution, a record. If you have ever had your hours, assignment, or output entered into a system, the basic idea suddenly feels familiar. But this is also where the story can fool us. Recorded labor is not the same thing as hired labor. A tablet can prove that an institution was managing people and resources. It cannot, by itself, tell us why every worker was there. Some people owed labor. Some depended on institutions or large households. Some were enslaved, and some were hired. From a distance, two people could be doing the same physical task and still have completely different relationships to that work. One might be fulfilling an obligation. Another might be supported by the institution. Another might actually be exchanging labor for compensation. So the ration is only a clue. Being counted is only a clue. Being managed is only a clue. None of those, alone, proves employment. The deeper question is this: when do the records clearly show actual hiring? By the UR3 period, around 4,000 years ago, the evidence becomes much sharper. At Uruk, we can see institutions recording workers and resources. UR3 lets us see more of the machinery. Administrative tablets could track groups of workers under supervisors. Labor could be counted in workdays. Workers could be assigned to tasks. Expected output could be compared with labor supplied. Lost workdays could appear in the accounting. One study follows groups of female workers placed under foremen and assigned to work in a brewery. Their labor could be converted into workdays and evaluated administratively. That is when the system stops feeling abstract. A worker, a supervisor, a task, a number of days. An expected result. Thousands of years before modern offices or spreadsheets, human effort was already being turned into administrative numbers. If that sounds familiar, it should. The technology is ancient. The logic of tracking labor is not. But even that is not the strongest clue. The stronger clue is that texts from this broad period also distinguish hired workers. Some records identify hired male and female workers and record barley given as payment. Now the relationship changes. A person provides labor. Another party provides compensation. And the payment does not have to be a coin. It can be barley. Imagine finishing a period of work and receiving grain instead of money. The object is completely different from a modern paycheck. The exchange underneath it is much easier to recognize. Work goes one way. Compensation comes back. That is much closer to something we would call hired work. A few centuries later, Old Babylonian law makes the pattern even clearer. The important point is not a long list of occupations. It is that hiring had become established enough for law to regulate the relationship and the compensation attached to it. The laws did not invent hiring. They show that it was already familiar enough to need rules. By this stage, the mystery has changed again. We are no longer asking whether humans could organize labor. They clearly could. We are no longer asking whether institutions could track workers. They clearly did. Now the evidence shows that hiring itself had become part of the system. And that creates the final complication. There was never just one kind of ancient worker. Institutions could demand labor, support dependent workers, supervise groups, or hire people. Those systems overlapped. So the road to employment was not one clean invention replacing everything that came before. It was a gradual change in who could organize work, how that work was recorded, and what the worker received in return. So when did humans start working for someone else? There is no single day when the job was invented. Humans had cooperated for others long before cities existed. What changed over time was the relationship around that work. By the early Mesopotamian cities, institutions were already organizing and recording labor beyond the household. And by around 4,000 years ago, surviving texts clearly show hired workers receiving compensation. That is the closest answer the evidence allows. Humans did not invent work. They gradually created systems that could organize, measure, record, and pay for someone else's labor. And one of the clearest surviving signs is not a coin. It is a clay tablet showing that someone's work had become important enough to count.